There is a kind of nourishment that every human being knows. It strengthens the body and keeps it alive. Yet Rudolf Steiner reminds us that the soul also needs nourishment, just as essential as bread and water. This nourishment arises from silence, not the outer absence of sound, but that deep inner silence where a person encounters their true self. In the ordinary hours of the day, we lose ourselves in countless words, thoughts, and impressions that flow over us like rushing streams. But in moments of silence, the current is broken. A space opens where the self is no longer scattered, but gathered. Here it becomes possible to hear something else, not the noise of the world, but the echo of the spirit. This silence is not emptiness. It is a filled space, like an invisible chamber where forces are at work that we do not notice in daily life. It supports us like solid ground. It nourishes us like a hidden spring. Whoever enters this space discovers that their innermost being is not alone, but carried by an order greater than their own thinking. Steiner emphasizes that this practice of silence does not lead to escaping the world. On the contrary, it makes a person capable of truly hearing the world. Whoever has learned silence listens more deeply to the words of others, perceives the subtle tones, and senses the truth behind what is spoken. Silence thus becomes a power that does not separate, but connects. That is why silence is like the breath of the soul. Just as the body takes in air in order to live, the self takes in silence in order to breathe spiritually. In it lies the preparation for all higher knowledge. It is not a luxury for a few, but a necessity for anyone who seeks the path to themselves. When we understand this, we see, just as the body perishes without food, so the soul grows poor without silence. And whoever seeks silence does not step into emptiness, but into a realm where the spiritual begins to speak. There is a force that gathers within a person when they remain silent. Steiner shows us that every unnecessary word, spoken carelessly, lets some of this force flow outward, like water carelessly spilled from a vessel. But every consciously guarded silence is like collecting, condensing, a kind of inner charging that can later turn into clarity and spiritual strength. The path of the student of spirituality therefore requires not only learning how to speak, but above all, how to listen. For whoever is constantly lost in their own talking, whoever seeks words for every feeling, every thought, every impulse, takes away from the inner life the chance to grow deeper. Words that are born without necessity scatter. Silence, on the other hand, gathers and orders. Listening, however, is more than passively receiving sounds. It is an attitude of inner attention in which we try to perceive the other not only on the surface, but in their inner being. Whoever is silent in order to listen receives more than mere information. They hear the mood, the hidden meaning, the unspoken that lives between the words. In this way, a new kind of meeting arises, one that reaches deeper than any quick speech. In this sense, silence becomes the source of a higher kind of language. For the more a person holds back their speech within, the clearer and more shaped the words will be when they are finally spoken. Such words do not carry the haste of the unconsidered, but the dignity of what has been inwardly tested. These words strike differently. They are like arrows that find their mark, not fired at random, but born from inner gathering. Thus, Steiner teaches us that silence does not mean emptiness, but an invisible storing of force. Whoever wishes to learn to recognize the spiritual must first learn to weigh their words, to endure silence, and to listen. For only in this silence does the strength awaken to distinguish what is essential and to receive what is true. The ordinary life of a human being is filled with a constant chain of stimuli and reactions. Someone says a word that hurts us, and before we even notice, we respond with a sharp tone. An event strikes us like a blow, and at once anger, fear, or desire flares up. It seems as if the soul is forced to react in the moment, as if the human being were only an echo of outer forces. But Rudolf Steiner shows us another way. True freedom begins exactly where we learn to create a space between impression and action. In this space lies the secret of transformation. Whoever does not answer immediately but pauses gives the self the chance to go beyond mere impulse. The pain that struck us does not have to turn into revenge, but can mature into the power of compassion. The temptation that lures us does not have to lead straight to action, but can become a test of willpower. The criticism that meets us does not have to end in defense, but can become an opportunity to know ourselves more deeply. This pause is not weakness, but the highest strength. For nothing is harder than holding back our own anger, restraining our own drive, or delaying our own words. Yet it is precisely in this delay that freedom opens. The human being is no longer a slave to the astral body that pushes them back and forth, but takes hold of the self, which orders, guides, and uplifts. Steiner makes clear that every pause we rest from life is like a spiritual breath. It makes us capable not only of reacting, but of shaping. In this pause, the eternal enters the fleeting, the moral enters the instinctive, the spiritual enters the everyday. So we come to see, true freedom is not the ability to do everything one wants, but the strength not to do immediately what one wants. It is the gift that reveals itself, where the self transforms the impulse and lifts the moment into an act of moral dignity. There are truths that rise within us like delicate seeds. They are sensitive, fragile, and they need silence and darkness, just as a plant needs the protecting earth before it can come into the light. Rudolf Steiner warns us not to put such spiritual experiences into words too soon, for what is still unripe within will break if it is forced too early into the hardness of language. The word has power. Every time we speak something, we place it into the world, and we take it away from the quiet sphere where it could still mature. An unripe spiritual experience not only loses its depth when expressed too soon, but often also its truth. It becomes a shadow of itself, a shell without a core, and the person who speaks too quickly robs themselves of the chance to let this experience unfold in its full richness. Therefore, silence is protection. Just as the gardener guards the seeds until they are strong enough to endure wind and sun, so too should the student of spirituality carry their inner experiences until they have taken enough form within. Only when they are strengthened in clarity and calm should they enter into words. And then they become not just words, but testimony. Not just communication, but power. Silence is not concealment, but an act of reverence. It preserves the sacred from fading. It protects what is delicate from the harshness of the world. Whoever speaks too soon loses depth. Whoever can wait gives the spirit the chance to come to completion. Thus, Steiner shows us, the secret of spiritual growth does not lie in the haste to share, but in the patience to let it ripen. And when the word is finally born, after being nourished in silence, it carries a power that does not only inform, but transforms. There is a silence that is not just the absence of noise, but an inner state in which the human being comes into harmony with the great rhythms of the cosmos. Rudolf Steiner describes that in this kind of silence, healing forces can become active, forces that do not come from ourselves, but from the depths of the spiritual that works in all things. In ordinary daily life, we are constantly in motion, driven by thoughts, images, worries, and tasks that scatter us and tear us inwardly apart. In such hours, the soul loses its center, and the body also falls out of balance. But when we become still, when we withdraw into that inner calm that is not sleep but wakefulness, something begins to happen. The breath deepens, the thoughts grow clearer, the feelings become calmer. In this state, a space opens where healing can take place. For healing is more than the repair of the body. Healing is the restoration of balance between the human being and the cosmos. In silence, the human being unconsciously takes part in the great breaths of the world, in the cycles of becoming and passing away, in the order that reaches far beyond them. This experience works like balm, not only on the soul, but also on the body. Thus it becomes clear. Silence is not an empty nothing. It is filled with life, with forces that stream into us when we stop drowning ourselves out. Whoever becomes still invites the forces of the world to unite with their inner being. It is as if a current flows through us, renewing us, strengthening us, bringing us into harmony. That is why silence can become a source of healing, not because we do something in it, but because we finally stop disturbing and allow the greater to work within us. In this silence, trust grows. In this silence, strength returns. In this silence, we feel that we are part of a cosmic rhythm that carries and heals us. There are truths that burn like a sacred fire. They give warmth and light, but they can also burn if they are shared without care. Rudolf Steiner reminds us that not every spiritual experience, not every insight, may be spoken at once. For every word that enters the world carries responsibility. It has an effect, whether we want it to or not. It creates reality. It touches souls. It can heal or wound, uplift or pull down. That is why esoteric silence does not mean simply keeping something secret. It means protecting the truth, just as one protects a precious vessel from breaking. Not because one wants to keep it for oneself, but because it must ripen, because the other must be ready to receive it. What is spoken too soon loses its core. What is heard without preparation turns into misunderstanding. Steiner emphasizes that silence here is a form of love. It protects not only the truth, but also the other person. For a great spiritual experience, shared carelessly, can become a burden or a temptation for someone unprepared. Whoever can remain silent practices responsibility. They understand that the spiritual is not a possession to be distributed at will, but a gift that asks to be guarded. Thus, an ethic of the word arises. Not everything that is true may be spoken, and not everything that is spoken serves the truth. The right word is the one that stands in harmony with the Spirit and is spoken at the right moment. Silence is therefore not falsehood, but fidelity. The secret that is kept is not a prison, but a sacred space. And when the time has come, when the soul is ripe and the heart prepared, then from silence a word can arise that carries, that transforms, that reveals truth. Thus Steiner shows us, to honor the truth does not mean to shout it out everywhere, but to guard it until it can be spoken in the strength of the Spirit at the right moment. There is a silence that is not only a retreat, not only a pause between two words, not only the quiet that follows after noise. There is a silence that becomes a gate, a passage, a threshold moment in which the soul enters a new world. Rudolf Steiner describes that this silence does not lead into nothingness, but is the place where the Logos, the creative word of the Spirit, can be heard within. When the soul has learned to be silent, when it no longer follows every impulse, no longer gives immediate expression to every thought, when it has gathered its forces like a vessel that is full yet resting in stillness, then another capacity awakens, the ability to hear what is otherwise drowned out. Then the soul begins to listen, and this listening is not directed outward to the world, but inward, to where the eternal speaks. Silence thus becomes the gateway through which the spiritual enters our consciousness. It is not a vacuum, not an empty hole, but a space filled with light, in which the self unites with the world of the spirit. And whoever has this experience realizes what they hear there are not their own thoughts, but something greater taking shape within them. It is the word that was from the beginning, the creative principle living in all things. Steiner emphasizes that this logos is not heard with outer ears, but with an inner attentiveness that is born only in silence. Whoever becomes silent creates, within a space of resonance, and this space begins to reflect the spiritual. Then every silence becomes fruitful. Every pause becomes a threshold. Every listening becomes an encounter with the eternal. Thus we see, silence is not only a means of concentration, not only an exercise of discipline, but a gate. A gate that leads us from distraction to unity, from finiteness to the touch of the infinite. Whoever passes through this gate experiences that silence is the language of the spirit, and that the true word can only be born from this silence.